In 1939, a group of eccentric inventors were brought together by Winston Churchill. They fought the Nazis with British bulldog spirit and ingenuity. And by using salad bowls, condoms and corks to build bizarre but brilliantly effective weapons.
We need some inventions that give us a bit of a cutting edge, a chance to fight back.
With the country facing disaster, they defied authority to defend Britain in its darkest hour.
They would do what had to be done. They didn't worry too much about the rules.
But when the war ended, they were erased from history. So nobody knew that this top-secret unit even existed. This is the story of Churchill's Toyshop. (1946), a year after the end of World War II, and the world's most unconventional secret weapons lab was shut down. Just 5 years earlier, it had been at the heart of secret efforts to prepare for a possible German invasion by building dozens of astonishing inventions. Using everything from headache pills to condoms to sweets. The unit had also equipped Allied soldiers across the world with the tools they needed to fight the Nazis' most dangerous machines. It was called Ministry of Defence 1, or MD1, and had been Winston Churchill's pet project. As former British Army captain Patrick Berry explains.
He sets out to find some inventors from many different walks of life, marry them with some military, unconventional thinkers to come together to help Britain. What he wants is something that's a bit outrageous, a bit unorthodox, a bit like Churchill.
MD1 was so close to the Prime Minister's heart that it became known as Churchill's Toyshop. It had been so secret that almost no archive footage of its operations exists. It broke rules to create a succession of highly experimental, cutting-edge weapons in just weeks instead of years. And in part, had also been Ian Fleming's inspiration for James Bond's weapon supplier, Shew. But just how did this unique, top-secret team build such an astonishing organization? 1939. And the world was on the brink of war. Germany had already occupied Austria and Czechoslovakia.
Britain is behind the curve in the armaments race. Germany is miles ahead. It's been arming since the 30s, building tanks, building ships, increasing their air force and increasing their army.
Britain had promised to defend Poland if Germany attacked. But Britain was far from ready. Churchill, not yet in government, was campaigning for rearmament.
Churchill realizes that we're not going to match them quick enough in terms of the size of our forces. We need some inventions that give us a bit of a cutting edge, a chance to fight back, and a chance to hold the ground even if the Germans invade.
And these weapons would require unconventional creators. One such frustrated weapons inventor was Stuart McCrae, who at the time was the editor of Armchair Science magazine.
Stuart McCrae does have a bit of military experience. In the First World War, he designed a system for dropping grenades from planes, and he's desperate to get back into the weapons industry.
In June 1939, he received a mysterious phone call. The caller demanded that McCrae provide him with information about magnets, but wouldn't reveal why. Intrigued, McCrae convinced the man to meet in a Soho bar. The caller was Major Millis Jeffries, a decorated soldier who was known to enjoy developing and detonating explosive weapons. His son John recollects his father's unorthodox approach.
He was exceptional. His energy, his his concentration, his stamina to produce the idea in a slightly wayward, unusual form. In that way, he was a genius.
And Jeffries had been given a mission by senior soldiers in the War Office.
Millis Jeffries is told to come up with smaller weapons for irregular operations, for saboteurs to use, for commandos to use, because he realizes that these could fill the gap in the meantime while these longer projects come to fruition.
Over several drinks, Jeffries revealed his idea for one such weapon.
Purely by accident, Father had this idea of making what he called a magnetic mine, which was something that a saboteur, a swimmer, could put on the hull of a metal vessel. It would stick to it by magnets, and it would have a timer, and it would go bang after a certain time and sink the boat.
McCrae was intrigued, and the two men agreed a deal to design weapons together.
Basically, this whole operation is off the cuff. They don't have any facilities. They don't even have an office. And so McCrae is going to have to come up with the whole thing off the bat.
McCrae left his job and was fast-tracked into the army, armed only with a pile of magnets.
So the whole plan is basically to come up with a prototype of some sort and then present it. And once they do that, then they can maybe get some money and get some resources to help them.
The German war machine would be totally unprepared for what it was about to face. Gordon Rogers has spent years researching the history of MD1.
The facilities for building the mine were just a workshop at Bedford, Nobby Clark's workshop.
Retired soldier and inventor, Nobby Clark, was an old friend of McCrae's. The two men planned to create a device packed full of explosive that could attach to a ship's hull, remain watertight, and detonate on a timer. It also had to be small enough to be carried by a frogman. They took the unconventional approach of using a metal salad bowl with a lid to create a flat surface. They stuck magnets around the edge so it would clamp to metal. But they had to come up with a way of attaching it to the diver. Their solution was a metal plate on a strap that would be tied around the diver's waist. And they realized that the mine's own magnets could be used to secure it. Trial and error revealed the correct number of magnets to use. Now they just needed some kind of timing fuse that would set it off. It had to dissolve in water at a predetermined rate before exploding, allowing the frogman time to get away. The only small issue was that such a device didn't actually exist. As McCrae contemplated the problem, he sucked on some aniseed balls that were in the workshop. In a eureka moment, he realized that each sweet took the same amount of time to dissolve in his mouth.
Aniseed balls were the answer because they would decay at a regular rate in water of various temperatures and various salinity.
Immediately, the pair bought every aniseed ball in Bedford, depriving the town's children of sweets for king and country. They built a simple fuse consisting of a spring-loaded striker, held back by an aniseed ball.
The ball would decay until eventually the striker was released to hit the detonator.
But there was another problem.
And of course you had to keep these dry until you wanted to start the thing off. How did you do that? With a condom. So these guys got a reputation as sexual athletes as they scoured the Bedford region looking for condoms.
Their unlikely contraption proved to be completely watertight. With nothing more than a few household items and a spark of brilliance, they had invented an entirely new weapon, the Mark I limpet mine.
What we've got here is the finished product. So what you can see here, yeah, we've got the kind of encased steel shell. 2 fuses screwed in here by the frogman or whoever's arming the device. And inside here is where you have the explosives. You can see clearly the magnets. This is the innovative bit that Jeffress came up with. Quite thick magnets, give it a good bit of suction onto either the hull of a ship or a tank. And then you've also got the belt here, which would be for the frogman. If he had to swim up to the boat, he'd have this, you know, round his waist, then arm it, and then stick it to a hull. It goes to show you how quickly something can go from a salad bowl and an aniseed ball to a mass-produced industrial mine, which really was quite effective.
All that was left was to blow something up. McRae and Clark prepared to teach a metal plate a serious lesson. It worked perfectly. Their jerry-rigged contraption was capable of punching through armor plating. Thousands were produced during the war. In one operation alone, 14 Allied commandos used limpet mines to sink 7 Japanese warships. Their success couldn't have come at a more vital time. On the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. World War II had begun. And Britain's madcap inventors would have to go into overdrive with whatever materials they could get their hands on. Although having declared war on Nazi Germany, Britain was unprepared.
Britain is playing catch-up, essentially. It's increased the size of its army, it's introduced conscription, and because the army is bigger, it needs more weapons for them.
Jeffress and McRae's makeshift lab was officially made part of the War Office. But they were going to have to bend the rules to survive.
They're still only 2 blokes, they've still got very little money, and they're still completely under-resourced, and they're a very low priority.
They had little space, and the packets of high explosive they secretly carried into their room were stored in a filing cabinet. Despite its official role, the toy shop was at the bottom of the pile.
Here was a unit that were novices at the game, were completely freewheeling and careless about regulation. And of course, this irritated the establishment who live by regulation.
But their fortunes were about to change. One politician, whose maverick instinct and reputation matched their own, was about to enter the fray.
Churchill can see that Britain is on the back foot, yet he knows politically that he needs to have some offensive operations to give people the confidence that Britain can actually win this war.
Though not yet Prime Minister, Churchill was in command of the Navy. And as the Nazis' attention turned towards France and Britain, he recognized the need to strike back. Churchill decided that attacking the Rhine River would seriously disrupt the Germans' own military supplies.
The Rhine River is Germany's lifeblood. It's a major route for transporting industry and food across Germany. Churchill basically thinks, if I can put something there that chokes off the Rhine, that shuts it down, even for a time, it can halt German industrial output and it can spread terror amongst the German population.
But to succeed, Churchill would require a new kind of weapon. On the 10th of November 1939, Jeffress was ordered to a meeting to hear Churchill's plan.
So the idea that Churchill has is that mines of some sort can be dropped into the river, float downstream under the water, and then explode using a timed fuse. But the big problem is the weapon hasn't been invented yet.
Jeffress promised to invent Churchill's mine within 2 weeks. The pair got cracking to design what they planned to call the water, or W-bomb.
This particular specification was that it should sink to the bottom rest there for a bit, float to the position just under the surface, arm itself, and float down the river, bobbing 2 feet under the surface until it hit a target.
When the bomb's submerged, a chemical pellet dissolves. This triggers a spring that pops the lid off and releases corks that prevent the bomb breaking the surface. Almost simultaneously, antennae pop out, designed to trigger the bomb on contact. In just a matter of days, McCrae and Jeffries began building a prototype.
In fact, he got a conceptual design out in 2 weeks, and with a model to suit.
But they struggled to find the perfect dissolving pellet, and aniseed balls took too long. Inspiration struck McCrae from an unusual place: the headache tablets they kept on hand to deal with regular hangovers. Through repeated tests, they discovered that the tablets consistently dissolved in 5 minutes. With just days to go before demonstrating the weapon to Churchill, they succeeded in constructing a full-size version. But it still had to be tested. So Jeffries and McCrae headed to the Thames, hurling the prototype into the river. Unfortunately, they forgot to pull the safety pin. The bomb sunk to the bottom and was never seen again. The test was a failure, but they wouldn't let it stop them. And at a midnight meeting, Jeffries demonstrated a second prototype to Churchill.
He recognizes father as being a man of particular ingenuity, and I think he uses the word brilliance, which is very glowing from someone like Churchill. Churchill was a very good judge of character, I think, and recognized the ability of people, and always brought people on through merit instead of promoting by seniority. Churchill was obviously impressed by this amazing presentation of what he wanted.
By December 1939, the W bomb was ready for explosive testing, and Churchill was determined to witness his big idea in action.
Oh, he was naturally drawn, because Churchill loved things going bang. He loved firing guns, he loved explosives, he likes to watch when things were whizzing about.
The weapon's 20 pounds of explosive were primed and put on a show. Churchill was delighted with the W bomb and immediately cleared it for operational use. McCrae and Jeffries were now running Churchill's Toyshop.
Jeffries was having ideas, but every 2 weeks he'd come up with a new weapon. What a man, fantastic inventor.
But his genius was about to be put to the test during Britain's darkest hour. On the 10th of May 1940, Churchill became Prime Minister. Just hours later, the Germans launched a massive offensive against France. With both the French and British armies in a desperate situation, Churchill launched his W bombs in Operation Royal Marine.
And it involves just pushing the mines down the river from areas of France. And it causes quite a big effect.
1,700 W bombs drifted down the Rhine and caused massive damage to shipping and bridges. Jeffries and McCrae's weapon had been vindicated, but it couldn't stop the Allied collapse.
It's lost, really, in the noise of the defeat of the French army, the withdrawal of the British army, and the evacuation from Dunkirk, where they leave massive amount of their heavy weapons and kit on the beach. And essentially, Churchill later says that although Operation Wolverine was actually a success, it was lost in the deluge of defeat.
With the army almost defenseless and a German invasion imminent, Churchill would look to the toy shop for salvation. By the middle of 1940, Germany had swept across Europe. By June, France had been conquered too, and Hitler had Britain firmly in his sights. France had been quickly crushed by Germany's tanks. If they arrived on British shores, Churchill would need a new weapon to defeat them.
What Britain needs is a low-tech, inexpensive weapon that anyone can use, from the Home Guard to the nascent army, that can be used against tanks quickly and effectively.
McRae and Jeffries toyed with the notion of sticking a bomb to a tank's armor.
Throw the explosive at the tank. Somehow we will make it stick to the plate for long enough for it to explode and hopefully do some damage.
An early version had used bicycle inner tubes full of explosive and covered in glue. They were completely uncontrollable and a total failure. McRae went back to the drawing board. He tried various bizarre shapes with flat surfaces to provide contact, but they were impossible to throw correctly. The ideal shape seemed to be a ball. But if it was covered in glue, it would stick to the thrower. So McRae added a handle. But he then needed the ball to somehow release the explosive upon impact. In a stroke of genius, McRae came up with the idea of a glass ball. For safety's sake, he used wet porridge instead of explosive. It shattered perfectly, but the porridge went everywhere, limiting the explosive effect. As ever, he came up with a simple but ingenious solution. By pulling a glue-covered sock over the top of the glass ball, it would still shatter, but would also stick to a surface and retain the explosive.
What we've got here is an instructional sticky bomb. Because it's so sticky, you need some sort of cover for it. So you've got this metal outer housing, which then comes away and releases the sticky bomb itself. Right in the centre of here, you would have had about 1.5 pounds of nitroglycerine explosives. Now, there's one crucial thing that you have to remember if you're going to do this for real, and that is that the handle is pointing back the way you probably threw it. So you need to be very careful, because when that device goes off, as well as punching that way, it's obviously sending force going this way, and the handle can come shooting out at about 1/3 the speed of the actual explosion, and obviously you don't want to be on the receiving end of that.
In just a few weeks, the device had gone from drawing board to firing range. The toffee apple-like weapon was tested in absolute secrecy during 1940, with the Prime Minister looking on. The new grenade was a resounding success, and Churchill was delighted. The design fulfilled his requirement for a simple, cheap, and portable weapon that could combat invading German tanks. But the establishment didn't approve.
Well, you can imagine that, this was extraordinary. I mean, throwing a grenade was one thing, which grenades have been in existence for a long time. But to put a lump of explosive inside a glass container, which is a thin glass, was thin enough to smash when it hit the target, was not according to regulation at all.
It was a health and safety nightmare. Throughout the year, permission was repeatedly denied for manufacturing. When Churchill became aware of the delays, he personally intervened. His one-line note read, "Sticky bomb, make 1 million, WSC." The toy shop went on to produce 2.5 million, with the weapon used in action on battlefields from North Africa to Papua New Guinea. But its freewheeling approach put the traditional government weapons departments to shame.
They could turn something out in a few days and say, does this work or does it not work? And the next day they would refine it and change it and make it work. A small unit is much quicker on its feet than the large civilian establishments that existed. And this too was a bone of contention.
The toy shop's greatest enemy was the Ministry of Supply. It coordinated the supply of all equipment to the armed forces, from weapons to vehicles to food.
Well, the Ministry of Supply was formed in 1939 with the burgeoning prospects of war, and its purpose was to supply the whole military, massive operation.
McRae and Jefferies were seen as loose cannons who had a disregard for the chain of command. In July 1940, a senior officer named Brigadier Wyndham was sent to find out exactly what was going on in the toy shop.
The department was fighting being overcome by the Ministry of Supply, and there was a constant threat of acquisition. Brigadier Wyndham was going to inspect them with a view to taking them over.
McRae decided to make their small band of inventors look like a larger operation, because it would make them seem more official in Wyndham's eyes.
What the hell is going on here? Who's in charge?
While McRae led the brigadier from room to room, the workers took a different route to the next location, quickly switching overalls. When the brigadier entered, they pretended to be different technicians doing a completely different job. This amazing con trick actually worked. The brigadier reluctantly accepted that the toy shop was too big to close down. Having avoided obliteration by the skin of its teeth, the only way was up for the unit. In the May of 1940, Churchill had created a new Ministry of Defence to coordinate the war effort which he led. So he was able to decree that its first and only armament production department would be the toy shop, codenamed MD1, and it would only answer to Churchill.
He'd always sought after a little working force directly under his control. If he had a brilliant idea, he could pass it to this small unit and get it developed and refined without having to go through this long process.
With an ever-growing portfolio of weapons, the toy shop needed a purpose-built facility. McRae engineered a move to a country house in Whitchurch, 50 miles from London. By the end of 1940, Whitchurch was fully operational, with drawing offices, workshops, testing ranges, and of course its own bar. Finally, the toy shop was a fully self-contained design, production and testing facility. It expanded rapidly in its own unique way. Short of technicians, the on-site barber was trained to manufacture explosives. A workforce was quickly put together to churn out the toy shop's designs.
They got a number of young girls from Wales up to run the factories. The girls weren't very happy to start with, I don't think, but Soon there was a lovely atmosphere developed in the place. They were all working together.
Through 1941, the toy shop expanded to 250 people, linked to a network of suppliers and manufacturers from Scotland to London. It was at the heart of unorthodox British weapons design and produced everything from covert booby traps to anti-tank weapons.
By the end of 1940, the Battle of Britain has been decided in Britain's favour. But Germany is still in charge of the whole of Western Europe.
It was time for the toy shop to take the war to the enemy. By 1942, the threat of an invasion of Britain had receded, but Germany was far from defeated. Allied special operations teams were still probing for weaknesses in Nazi-occupied Europe.
If you're going to do something in Europe, and we're talking about small teams, irregular warfare, special operations, commando and power raids, well then you're going to need different kinds of weapons. You're going to need small devices which, when attached to explosives, will be able to hopefully wreak havoc on the German infrastructure.
However, these new small weapons had a problem with inaccurate time delay fuses. Ian Jones is a former British Army and police bomb disposal expert.
If you're a saboteur and you want to carry out demolitions, there is a clear need to get in, place your charges, and get away so that you're far from the scene when the device actually explodes.
At the time, the standard fuse was known as a time pencil, but it was unreliable.
The problem I had with the time pencil was that the delays varied hugely, and MD1 thought they could improve on this.
Jeffress had a remarkable idea.
Father had read somewhere that lead under tension crept, expanded under load very slowly.
He came up with the concept of a piece of specially shaped lead that was pulled by a spring. The lead would slowly stretch, eventually breaking, which in turn set off a detonator. The new fuse was named the lead, or L, delay.
Here is a L delay fuse. Essentially how it works is that you've got a safety mechanism here. When you take that out, inside is a specially manufactured strip of lead. Now, the strip of lead can be, varying levels of thickness, and that thickness, therefore, determines how long it takes to go through. And it's basically working on a spring mechanism, and it's slowly stretching the lead until breaking point. So the thicker the lead, the longer it takes to go. What's really interesting about this is it's based on mechanics. It's based on understanding the properties of lead at certain temperatures. There's no electronics here. So, an innovative device.
It immediately became a standard military timing fuse. 5 million were produced by the toy shop during the war.
It differed from anything that had gone before. I mean, it was completely novel. It was cheap, it was predictable, which is the success of any invention, isn't it?
By the autumn of 1942, the Allies were finally moving onto the offensive. In North Africa, the British 8th Army struck a decisive blow at El Alamein.
The victory at El Alamein is the first major British victory of the war. And crucially, it gives the Allies the chance to springboard into Italy and take the fight to the Germans on the European mainland.
But the Desert War had revealed that British infantry weapons performed badly against German tanks in a major battle. The toy shop's own sticky bomb had been designed for a last-ditch defense of Britain, but the army needed something with a bigger punch.
What they need and what's identified is some sort of explosive charge which gives them a chance of engaging a German tank.
The British needed their own portable anti-tank weapon, and they needed it quickly. The toy shop had been experimenting with mortars since the beginning of the war.
So a mortar is basically a close support infantry weapon. You drop a bomblet down a tube, it hits the firing mechanism, shoots out of the tube, and comes down and explodes.
But it wasn't particularly accurate. Jeffries thought he could do better. He discovered the remains of a type of mortar that, instead of a tube, used a spring-loaded rod, known as a spigot. Its projectile fitted over the spigot, which was pushed by a spring. It triggered a small charge that propelled the projectile forwards.
So this means that you can put quite a large diameter projectile, you know, be it 3 inches or 6 inches, onto the spigot, and instead of having to enclose it in a 6-inch diameter barrel, you can reduce it to quite a light-based device.
Jeffries decided to turn the spigot mortar into a shoulder-fired system,
which meant that it was something that you could carry around, you could use in any position, lying down or standing up, or even from the hip in some occasions.
The first test showed that the spigot spring had an almighty recoil. By adjusting the spring, he developed the ideal balance between recoil and force. But there was another problem. The bomb had to be able to pierce the tank's thick armor. Again, genius struck. Jeffries used a concept known as the shaped charge. A shaped charge projectile contains explosive packed behind a cone of copper. When the projectile hits its target, the explosive detonates and melts the cone. The detonation pushes the molten metal forwards with such force that it can punch through thick metal armor. On the firing range, Jeffries loaded a shaped charge into his perfected shoulder-launching system and fired at an armor-plated target. The result was an outstanding success. The shaped charge penetrated the heaviest armor used on German tanks.
It suddenly provided a man in the front-line battle, the infantryman, with a means of combating a tank. Suddenly, he didn't have to run. He could stay and fight.
The weapon was named Projectile Infantry Anti-Tank, or PIAT for short.
It was originally called the Jeffries shoulder gun, but they didn't like people's names, so they changed it to PIAT.
It was a massive breakthrough.
The advantages of the PIAT are threefold. First of all, it's smokeless, so it can be used in relatively dangerous situations and not give away the firer's position. Secondly, it's portable, and thirdly, the shaped charge gives it a bit more punch than you'd expect from the size of that weapon.
The PIAT was first used in combat in the 1943 Allied invasion of Sicily. Several Victoria Crosses were won by PIAT teams, and the Canadian Army ranked it as its most effective infantry weapon. By 1944, the Nazis were in retreat, and the Allies had victory in their sights. The invasion of Europe was imminent, and the toy shop's inventions would be at the heart of France's liberation.
The important thing, I think, certainly for the French resistance in 1944, was their support to D-Day. And in the lead up to D-Day, they were supplied with a lot of explosives and L-delays, which were produced by MD1.
To support the Allied landings, the resistance was tasked with destroying German logistics.
And on the night of D-Day, they disrupted French railways. They allegedly broke the lines in 1,000 places, and up to 3,000 lines were cut in the following 3 weeks. So that was a huge effect in preventing Germans getting their reinforcing divisions actually into the battle area.
Explosive triggers, known as switches, designed by the toy shop, helped drive the Nazis back.
They were certainly used to cut railways and to attack railways. Some of the booby trap switches were used to derail trains as well. If you want to cut a railway line, you can just do it with a bit of explosive. If you want to definitely do a lot of damage, then when you want to do that as the train is going over it, then in that case you need a pressure switch, which MD1 developed.
With the invasion a success, the end of the war was on the horizon. The toy shop's future seemed secure. Their mines, bombs, and anti-tank weapons had been used in dozens of special operations and countless battles. But in fact, its downfall was looming.
The toy shop's reliance on Churchill's support has been really good for it in the past. It's allowed it to bypass the bureaucracy and get new weapons into production and out to the troops as quickly as possible. However, Churchill's patronage has also been a bit of a double-edged sword. It made the toy shop upset people in the wider military bureaucracy, and they're singularly reliant on his support for their continued existence.
Shortly after the Nazi surrender on the 8th of May 1945, Churchill lost the British general election.
And this is catastrophic for the toy shop. Suddenly they've lost their patron.
And once Japan surrendered on the 15th of August, military production across Britain instantly ground to a halt. The war was over, and with it went the toy shop's main reason to exist.
With Churchill gone, the toy shop is in the firing line. The military bureaucracy that have had to put up with all this, what they would have seen as madcap nonsense, now can move in and dismantle the toy shop.
On the 1st of November 1945, the Ministry of Supply officially took over the unit and began sacking the staff. Millis Jefferies remained in the army, eventually running a top-secret school of military engineering. Stuart McRae returned to civilian life, where he worked in the energy industry.
I think McRae was gutted by it. He'd fought to keep this intact. He got a wonderful establishment, and suddenly it was kicked from under him.
But even worse, the toy shop was systematically wiped from the official histories of the war by a bureaucracy jealous of its special treatment by Churchill and of its success.
Even the idea of creating a museum for the toy shop's work is declined. They don't want anything to do with it.
Churchill's departure brought down the curtain on a hidden part of British military history. But it had been his own unorthodox approach that had allowed the toy shop to succeed during its brief life.
The toy shop is very much a representation of Churchill's personality. This idea for the madcap, the try anything, the unconventional, out-of-the-box thinker, because of Churchill's mindset himself, it gave an opportunity for free thinkers to rise to the top. And as long as they could produce the goods, and as long as it actually worked and was effective, Churchill would always be open to an idea.
Churchill's collection of geniuses, rule breakers, and innovators had helped to protect Britain in its darkest hour. And onwards to victory.